I never thought I'd find freedom in a manila envelope. But there I was, sitting at my parents' cherrywood dining table, the one my grandfather had handcrafted 50 years ago, with my fingers pressed against official bank documents that would end my family's legacy. The room smelled of my mother's signature pot roast and disappointment. Rachel, honestly, if you put half the effort into the store that you do into your corporate job, we wouldn't be struggling, my mother said, passing the mashed potatoes to my brother Daniel without looking at me. Your grandfather would be heartbroken to see how little you care about what he built. I took a slow sip of water, feeling the weight of the foreclosure papers in my purse beside me. Papers they didn't know existed. Papers I'd received that morning, despite having secretly transferred $43,000 of my own savings into their business account over the past 18 months. You've always been like this, my father chimed in, knife scraping against his plate. So much potential, but your priorities are all wrong. In that moment, as my family nodded in agreement around the table we'd gathered at every month for my entire life, something inside me finally snapped. Not with a bang, but with a clarity, so profound it felt like waking up from a decades-long sleep. I straightened my shoulders and placed my napkin beside my barely touched dinner. You know what, Dad? You're right. My priorities have been all wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Rachel Wilson, and until 6 months ago, I was the family fixer. The responsible one. The one who would drop everything when the Wilson Fine Furniture store needed emergency accounting help, who organized every family gathering, who listened to my parents lament about kids these days, not understanding family loyalty, all while silently transferring my bonus checks into their failing business account. I'm the middle child who got an MBA with honors while working full-time, who postponed dreams of traveling because someone needed to make sure the family books balanced. Meanwhile, my brother Daniel got celebrated for following his passion with his barely profitable graphic design business. He's an artist, my mother would say, as if that explained why he hadn't contributed a dime to saving our family's legacy, while I was expected to sacrifice everything. This monthly dinner wasn't my idea. I was exhausted from a week of closing, a major account at my financial consulting firm, bringing in the very money that kept floating my parents' store. But Mother insisted we couldn't break tradition. Family comes first, Rachel, she'd said on the phone, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. So I did what I always did. I showed up, I brought the wine, I helped set the table with the good china no one else bothered to arrange properly. What my parents didn't know was that I'd been in a private meeting with their bank that morning. Despite all my financial assistance, Wilson Fine Furniture was being foreclosed on. The mid-sized store my grandparents had opened in 1978 had been bleeding money for years. My father refused to adapt to changing markets. My mother insisted their personal touch would save them from big-box competitors. Neither of them listened when I suggested e-commerce integration 3 years ago. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to save something that didn't want to be saved. And now, sitting at that table listening to them criticize me, I realized I wasn't even allowed to be the hero of this story. I was just expected to be the sacrifice. Rachel's zoned out again, my Aunt Helen said, nudging Uncle Frank. Probably thinking about spreadsheets instead of family. My cousin Tyler laughed. Classic Rachel, always has her head in the clouds. Head in the clouds, me, the person who hadn't taken a vacation in 4 years because someone needed to be the responsible one. I looked around at them, my mother's pursed lips, my father's disapproving stare, my brother scrolling through his phone under the table while his wife Vanessa complained about how hard it was finding reliable nannies these days. These people had no idea who I really was. They'd created a character named Rachel who existed solely to prop up their needs while absorbing their disappointment. The manila envelope felt heavy in my purse. The truth sat like cement in my chest. "I have something to tell you," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. 7 faces turned to me with varying degrees of interest. My mother sighed preemptively, as if bracing for something inconvenient. "The bank called me this morning," I continued. "They called me, not you, because my name has been on the loan documents for the past 2 years." My father's fork stopped, halfway to his mouth. My mother's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. "What are you talking about, Rachel?" she asked. I reached into my purse and placed the envelope on the table, right next to the crystal gravy boat that had been my grandmother's. "Wilson Fine Furniture is being foreclosed on. You have 30 days to liquidate inventory and vacate the building." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking from the living room. My father's face drained of color. My mother's hand flew to her throat. "That's impossible," my father finally said. "We made the payments. We always make the payments." "No, Dad, I made the payments. For 2 years I've been making the payments. I've put in over $40,000 of my own money trying to keep the store afloat, but it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough." My mother's eyes widened. "You? But how? Why didn't you tell us?" Would it have mattered? Every time I tried to talk about the store's financial reality, you told me I was being negative. Every suggestion I made was shot down because I didn't understand the business. And so I stopped suggesting and just started paying. Daniel put his phone down, finally engaged. "Wait, you've been paying their loan payments? From your salary?" I nodded. "And covering inventory shortfalls, and paying the electric bill when it was about to be shut off, and covering the insurance. Premium increase last year." My aunt and uncle exchanged uncomfortable glances. Vanessa suddenly became very interested in her napkin. My cousins looked genuinely shocked. "Why would you keep that from us?" my father demanded, color returning to his face in an angry flush. "If things were that bad, we deserved to know." I almost laughed. "I tried to tell you. 3 Christmases ago, I brought financial projections showing exactly where the business was headed. You accused me of trying to ruin the holiday and told me my corporate mindset was destroying my soul." My mother shook her head, tears forming. "We could have done something if we'd known how serious it was." "Like what, Mom? What would you have done differently?" Because from where I'm sitting, you two have spent years choosing comfortable denial over painful change. And somehow, that became my fault. I hadn't planned to say these things. For years, I'd rehearsed gentler versions of this conversation in my head. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But now that the words were flowing, I couldn't stop them. It felt like lancing a wound that had been festering for my entire adult life. I've spent years being told I'm not dedicated enough to this family, not committed enough to the business, not present enough at gatherings that I plan and pay for. Meanwhile, I've been silently sacrificing my own financial security, my free time, my mental health, and for what? To be called a disappointment over dinner? My father pushed his chair back from the table. "So that's it? You're just giving up on us? On everything your grandparents built?" I looked him directly in the eyes, something I realized I rarely did anymore. "The business was already gone, Dad. I was just postponing the inevitable and ruining myself in the process." My mother was openly crying now, not the manipulative tears I'd seen her use to end difficult conversations, but genuine, shocked sobs. "What are we supposed to do now?" For the first time in my life, I gave the honest answer instead of the comforting one. "I don't know. But figuring that out isn't my responsibility anymore." I stood up from the table, feeling strangely weightless. I'd expected to feel guilty, heartbroken, maybe even vengeful in this moment. Instead, all I felt was a profound relief. Like putting down a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for so long, I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my body. I've spent my entire life trying to be what this family needed instead of who I am. I'm done now. My Uncle Frank, always the peacemaker, spoke up. Rachel, honey, you're upset. We all say things we don't mean when we're upset. That's just it, Uncle Frank. For once, I'm saying exactly what I mean. I picked up my purse, leaving the envelope on the table. As I walked toward the front door, I heard chairs scraping, voices rising, my name being called. But I didn't turn around. I got into my car, closed the door, and sat there in the dark for a moment. Then I did something I'd never done before. I turned off my phone completely before driving away. The story should have ended there. A clean break, a dramatic exit, the satisfying sound of a door closing on a chapter of my life. But real life doesn't work that way. Real transformation isn't a moment. It's a process that unfolds over weeks, months, sometimes years. The first week after the dinner was chaos. 37 missed calls, 62 text messages, emails with subject lines that evolved from "call me immediately" to "we need to talk" to finally, "please, Rachel." I read them all, but I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I had nothing left to say. For the first time in my life, I was listening to myself. I took a week off work, my first voluntary vacation in years. I didn't go anywhere exotic. I just existed in my apartment, ordering takeout, watching movies in the middle of the day, and sleeping without setting an alarm. Simple things that felt revolutionary. On day 9, there was a knock at my door. It was Daniel, looking uncomfortable in the hallway of my apartment building. "They sent you as the ambassador?" I asked, not inviting him in. He shrugged. "I volunteered, actually. Can I come in? This is awkward." I stepped aside, noticing how strange it felt to have family in my space. Had Daniel ever visited my apartment? Before, I couldn't remember. He stood awkwardly in my living room, hands in his pockets. "Nice place." "Thanks. I've lived here for 4 years." The implied criticism hung in the air between us. He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Look, Rachel, everything's a mess. Dad's meeting with bankruptcy attorneys. Mom cries all the time. They're talking about moving in with Aunt Helen until they figure things out." I waited for the wave of guilt to hit me. It didn't come. "I'm sorry they're going through that," I said, and I meant it. "But I can't fix it for them." "That's not why I'm here," Daniel said, surprising me. "I'm here to say I had no idea what you were doing all this time. None of us did, and I'm sorry." I studied my brother's face, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years. We'd always been cast in our roles, Daniel the creative one, Rachel the practical one. But underneath those labels was just my brother, looking tired and genuinely remorseful. "It wasn't your fault," I said finally. "We all played our parts." "Yeah, but your part sucked, and I benefited from it. We all did." I offered him coffee, and we sat at my small kitchen table. For the first time in our adult lives, we had a real conversation. Not about family drama or holiday plans, but about who we actually were. He told me about his struggling design business, his fears of being a new father, his own complicated relationship with our parents' expectations. I told him about my secret dream of opening a financial literacy center for young women, about the photography class I'd signed up for 3 times and canceled each time when family emergencies arose. "You're a photographer?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "No," I answered. "But I wanted to be. I still do." When he left 2 hours later, something had shifted between us. Not a complete healing, but a crack in the facade of our assigned family roles. It felt like the first honest interaction I'd had with a family member in my entire adult life. The following weeks brought more changes. I met with my financial advisor to assess the damage I'd done to my own finances by propping up the store. It was sobering but not catastrophic. With discipline, I could rebuild my savings within a few years. I started setting boundaries at work too, leaving at reasonable hours, declining non-essential meetings. My boss, Victor, noticed the change. "You seem different, Wilson," he said after I presented a client proposal. "More focused." "I had a perspective shift," I told him. "Realized I've been living my life according to other people's priorities." He nodded thoughtfully. "Took me a divorce and a heart scare to learn that lesson. You're ahead of the curve." My parents eventually stopped calling every day. The store was liquidated. They moved in with my aunt and uncle, a temporary arrangement that everyone knew might not be so temporary. I heard updates through Daniel, who had become an unexpected bridge, not pressuring me to reconcile, just keeping me informed. 3 months after the dinner, I received a letter from my mother. Not a text, not an email, but an actual handwritten letter on stationery I recognized from her desk at home. "Dear Rachel," it began, "I've started this letter a dozen times, and I still don't know what to say. Your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking. We were wrong, not just about the business, but about you. We took you for granted. We expected you to save us while we criticized you for how you did it. We didn't see you, the real you. We saw what we needed you to be." I sat on my couch, letter in hand, tears blurring my vision. "We're starting counseling next week," she continued. "Not because we expect it to fix things with you, but because we need to understand how we went so wrong. Your father has gotten a job at the hardware store. It's minimum wage, and it's humbling for him, but he's trying. I'm selling crafts online, if you can believe it. That e-commerce idea you had years ago? Turns out you were right." She ended. The letter not with a plea for me to return to the fold, not with guilt or manipulation, but with something I'd never heard from her before. "I'm proud of you, Rachel. Not for what you did for us, but for finally doing what was right for you. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, we'd like the chance to get to know the real you. Love, Mom." I didn't rush to reconcile. Some wounds take time to heal, and some trust takes time to rebuild. But I did something I hadn't done in years. I picked up a camera, a real one, not just my phone. I signed up for that photography class I'd canceled 3 times before. I started capturing images that spoke to me, urban landscapes, the play of light on Lake Erie at dawn, portraits of strangers who became friends. 6 months after the dinner that changed everything, I received a job offer from Chicago, a significant promotion, a chance to head up a new division focused on financial empowerment initiatives. The old Rachel would have declined immediately, citing family obligations. The new Rachel accepted. I decided to drive rather than fly to Chicago for my apartment hunting trip, taking the scenic route along the lake. Halfway there, I impulsively detoured to a small lakeside town and discovered a charming cabin resort with a weekly rentals sign. On a whim, I checked in. For 7 days, I woke with the sun, photographed the misty lake at dawn, worked remotely from a deck overlooking the water, and fell asleep to the sound of waves. It was the first time in my life I'd ever taken a solo vacation, and it felt like meeting myself for the first time. On the 5th day, I met an older woman named Eleanor during a sunrise photography session on the shore. She was in her 70s, with short silver hair and the kind of well-weathered face that told stories of a life lived fully outdoors. "You've got a good eye," she said, nodding at my camera. "Been shooting long?" I laughed. "No, actually. This is new for me. I'm just learning." She studied me. "Doesn't look new. Looks like something that's been inside you for a long time, just waiting for permission to come out." We sat on driftwood logs, watching the sun rise higher, cameras temporarily forgotten. "I spent 30 years in a corporate job I hated," Eleanor offered without prompting. "Banking, made good money, had the big house, the respectable life. Then, my husband died suddenly at 58, and I realized I'd been postponing living. Sold everything, bought a camper, and have been photographing America's lakes ever since. "That's brave," I said. She shrugged. "Not brave. Necessary. There's a difference between existing and living. Most people never figure that out, or figure it out too late." We exchanged emails before I left. She's now a mentor of sorts. This stranger who somehow saw right through to the core of me in a single conversation. The last day at the cabin, I got a text from Daniel. Our parents had found an affordable apartment. Dad was still at the hardware store but had been promoted to floor manager. Mom's online craft business was doing surprisingly well. They were adapting, surviving without my safety net. I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, vindication, and yes, a lingering sadness for what might have been if we'd all been different people. But mostly, I felt free. A week before my move to Chicago, I did something that surprised even me. I invited my family to dinner. Not at their house, not at a restaurant, but at my apartment. My space, my terms. I half expected them to decline. They all accepted. The evening was awkward at first. My father looked older, the cockiness gone from his posture. My mother brought a small handmade gift, a photo frame she'd crafted herself. Daniel and Vanessa brought their baby, my niece whom I'd barely seen because family gatherings had become too painful. "Nice place," my father said, echoing Daniel's words from months ago, but with a different tone. One that acknowledged he was a guest here, not an authority. "Thank you," I replied. "I've made it my own." We ate the meal I'd prepared. Nothing fancy, just simple food that I enjoyed cooking. I showed them some of my photographs. My mother actually looked at them, really looked, asking questions about technique and composition. My father held his granddaughter and didn't once mention the store or the past. Before they left, my mother hugged me tentatively. "We're proud of you, Rachel," she whispered. "The Chicago job, your photography, all of it." I didn't cry until after they left. Not from sadness, but from the strange relief of being seen, really seen, by the people who had looked past me for so long. The next morning, I packed the last of my things for Chicago. Among them was a small box containing the photographs I'd taken at the lake. On top was a note from Eleanor. "Remember, living authentically isn't selfish. It's the most generous thing you can do. The world needs people who have come alive." I placed the box in my car, alongside my camera equipment and the books I couldn't bear to leave behind. The furniture I'd leave for the next tenant. In Chicago, I'd start fresh, choosing pieces that reflected who I was becoming, not who I'd been expected to be. As I took one last look around the empty apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from my new boss in Chicago. "Team's excited to meet you Monday. Your office has a view of the lake." I smiled, thinking of Eleanor and her lakes, thinking of the sunrise photography sessions in my future, thinking of the financial literacy workshops I'd already started planning as part of my new role. The old Rachel would have felt guilty about this happiness, this focus on my own path. The new Rachel understood that breaking free wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Not just for me, but for all of us. By refusing to play my assigned role, I'd forced everyone, including myself, to grow. I locked the apartment door behind me, walked to my car, and headed west toward Chicago, toward a future I was finally allowing myself to imagine. In the rear view mirror, Cleveland grew smaller, but I knew I wasn't running away. For the first time in my life, I was running toward something, toward myself. That manila envelope of foreclosure papers had been the end of something, yes, but more importantly, it had been the beginning of everything else. I never planned to be the family savior. It wasn't a role I auditioned for or a cape I willingly put on. It happened in small moments, quiet decisions, and silent transfers that built up over years until I couldn't remember who I was without the weight of Wilson Fine furniture pressing down on my shoulders. The pattern began long before the foreclosure, before the disastrous family dinner, before I ever touched a financial spreadsheet. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment the script was written for my life. My 10th birthday party. Mom had planned an elaborate celebration, handmade invitations, decorations in my favorite colors, a cake she'd stayed up until 2 a.m. perfecting. But that morning, a pipe burst in the showroom of Wilson Fine Furniture. Dad was in Chicago at a trade show, and Grandpa Wilson, still running the business back then, was hospitalized with pneumonia. "Rachel, honey," Mom said, kneeling to my level, still wearing her bathrobe. "I need to go handle this emergency at the store. Can you be my big helper and get everything ready for your party? Daniel's too little to help." I remember the pride that swelled in my chest at being trusted, at being needed. I spent the day setting up games, arranging snacks, and reassuring 6-year-old Daniel that everything would be fine. When Mom returned just 15 minutes before guests arrived, flustered and apologetic, I showed her everything I'd done. "What would I do without my responsible girl?" she said, hugging me tightly. I didn't recognize it then, but that question would become the unspoken refrain of my childhood. What would the Wilsons do without Rachel? When I was 12, Grandpa Wilson had his first stroke. The family gathered at the hospital daily, taking shifts sitting with him. I was deemed mature enough to watch Daniel and run the household, cooking, frozen dinners, making sure homework got done, fielding phone calls from concerned relatives. "Rachel's so good in a crisis," I overheard Aunt Helen tell my mother. Such an old soul. By 14, I was working weekends at the furniture store, not because I wanted to, but because it was expected. While my friends went to movies and sleepovers, I learned bookkeeping from my grandmother, who ran the administrative side of the business. "You have a head for numbers," she told me. "Daniel takes after your father. Creative, charming, but hopeless with finances. You're like me. The backbone." She meant it as a compliment. I know that now. But backbones don't get noticed unless they break. They just silently support everything else. High school brought advanced math classes and the discovery that I genuinely enjoyed finance. Or perhaps I'd been conditioned to enjoy it because it was useful to the family. Either way, I excelled. When college application season arrived, there was an unspoken assumption that I'd attend Cleveland State to stay close to home. "Daniel needs more supervision," Mom explained when I mentioned Michigan State's renowned finance program. "And your father needs help with the quarterly taxes. You're so good at managing everything." So I stayed. I got my business degree locally, made the dean's list every semester, and worked at the store 20 hours a week. When Daniel graduated high school 2 years after me, everyone celebrated his acceptance to a prestigious art school in New York. "We'll miss you terribly," Mom said, tearful at his going-away party, a lavish affair I'd organized and paid for with my savings. "But you need to follow your dream." No one seemed to notice the irony. No one asked about my dreams. By 23, I was working at Sanders Financial Group, one of Cleveland's top consulting firms. The starting salary seemed enormous to me after years of the modest family discount wages I'd received at the store. For the first time, I could afford my own apartment, build savings, maybe even travel. Then Grandpa Wilson had his final stroke. In the aftermath, as the family grieved, it became clear that the store's finances were in disarray. No one had been monitoring accounts receivable during his illness. Vendors were threatening to cut us off. The lease payment was overdue. "Rachel," my father said during a family meeting, "we need you to help straighten this out. Just temporarily. You're the only one who understands this financial stuff." Temporarily. the word that defined the next decade of my life. I spent evenings and weekends reconstructing the books, negotiating with vendors, creating payment plans. I streamlined the accounting system, implemented inventory controls, and trained my parents on basic financial management. When I finally handed over a functioning business 6 months later, I thought my duty was fulfilled. 2 weeks later, Mom called in a panic. The point-of-sale system crashed and we can't process credit cards. Can you come fix it? This became the rhythm of my life. Emergency calls, last-minute requests, problems only I could solve. My career at Sanders advanced despite the constant interruptions. I was good enough at my job to compensate for the family distractions. But my personal life suffered. Friendships faded when I canceled plans too many times. Dating became nearly impossible. "You're married to that family business," my college roommate Naomi once told me during a rare dinner catch-up. "And honey, it's an abusive relationship." I laughed it off, but her words lingered. Was I in an abusive relationship with my family obligations? I pushed the thought away. Families support each other. This was normal. This was duty. When I was 28, the 2008 recession hit, and Wilson Fine Furniture began struggling in earnest. Housing construction halted. People stopped buying new furniture. Our town's largest employer laid off hundreds of workers. Sales plummeted. Dad refused to acknowledge the severity of the situation. "We weathered the energy crisis in the 70s, he'd say. "We'll weather this too." Wilson quality speaks for itself. But quality craftsmanship couldn't compete with big box stores selling imports at half our prices. I created financial projections showing a steady decline over the next 5 years. I prepared a presentation on diversification strategies, e-commerce, custom work, furniture restoration services. I'll never forget that Christmas. The family gathered at my parents' house, the same colonial where I'd grown up. The tree sparkled with ornaments collected over decades, including the little wooden chairs Grandpa had carved for each grandchild. After dinner, I set up my laptop at the dining table. "I've been analyzing the store's situation," I began, "and I think we need to make some strategic changes if we want to survive long term." My father's face hardened. "This is Christmas, Rachel. Can't you turn off the corporate robot routine for one day?" "Robert," my mother admonished, "she's trying to help." "No, she's trying to tell us everything we're doing wrong. Just like those consultants who charge a fortune to state the obvious." I pressed on, showing charts of declining foot traffic, rising overhead costs, shrinking margins. Daniel, home from New York for the holidays, looked uncomfortable, but said, "Nothing." Uncle Frank studied his dessert plate. Aunt Helen refilled wine glasses no one had emptied. "E-commerce is the future," I explained. "If we create an online presence—" "Furniture isn't books or electronics," Dad interrupted. "People need to feel the quality, sit in the chairs, open the drawers. Your grandfather understood that personal connection is what separates us from the soulless chains." "I'm not suggesting we close the showroom," I countered. "Just expand our reach beyond Cleveland." "That corporate job has changed you," he said, pushing back from the table. "You used to understand what makes this business special. Now all you see are numbers on a spreadsheet." He walked out of the room. No one spoke for several long moments. "He's under a lot of pressure," Mom finally said. "You know how much the store means to him." I closed my laptop, feeling defeated and misunderstood. Later that night, as I helped clean up the kitchen, Mom touched my arm. "Your father's proud of you, you know. He just doesn't understand your world. Give him time." Time didn't help. The recession lingered. The store's situation worsened. I kept offering suggestions. They kept being rejected. Until one Tuesday afternoon when my office phone rang. "Rachel, it's Dad. We've got a problem." The problem was a bank notice. The store's credit line was being reduced by 60% due to changed economic conditions. The next loan payment was due in 3 days, and there wasn't enough in the account to cover it. I left work early, drove to the bank, and spent 2 hours negotiating with the loan officer. They agreed to a one-time extension, but the message was clear: get current quickly or face consequences. That night, I transferred $4,000 from my personal savings to the business account, the first of many such transfers. I told myself it was just this once, just to get through this rough patch. I never told my parents where the money came from. The pattern continued. Every few months, another crisis, another transfer. I refinanced my car to free up cash. I took out a personal loan. I used my year-end bonus to cover a tax bill. Always silently, always without acknowledgement. Meanwhile, Daniel thrived in New York. He won a prestigious design fellowship. His Instagram showed gallery openings, rooftop parties, weekend trips to the Hamptons with his girlfriend-turned-fiancée Vanessa. My parents flew out 4 times in 1 year to visit him. "We're so proud," Mom would gush on the phone after each trip. "He's really making a name for himself." They visited me exactly 0 times in Cleveland, despite living 20 minutes away. Why would they? I saw them weekly at the store, monthly at family dinners. I was a constant, dependable presence. Daniel was the special one, the one who needed celebrating. When he and Vanessa decided to move back to Cleveland, to start a family in a more affordable city, my parents were ecstatic. Daniel opened a small design studio downtown, which struggled to find clients in our economically depressed region. Vanessa landed a job at an advertising agency. They bought a charming fixer-upper in an up-and-coming neighborhood, which required extensive renovations. "Can you help them with a budget for the house?" Mom asked me. "You're so good with money." I spent weeks creating spreadsheets, researching contractors, helping them secure a favorable mortgage rate. When they went over budget on the kitchen remodel, I pretended not to notice that the loan my parents gave them, money the store couldn't afford to part with, was never mentioned again. All the while, Wilson Fine Furniture continued its slow decline. The showroom looked increasingly dated. The customer base aged without being replaced by younger shoppers. Online reviews complained about limited selection and high prices compared to national chains. I kept trying. I set up a Facebook page for the store, which my parents rarely updated. I offered to help create a basic website, but Dad insisted it wasn't necessary. I suggested a special financing program for first-time homebuyers. Mom worried it would attract the wrong element. Every suggestion was met with resistance, every change viewed with suspicion. Yet they continued to rely on my financial support, which had become substantial enough to impact my own financial security. By my 34th birthday, I had contributed over $43,000 to keeping the family business afloat. I had no savings left, a depleted retirement account, and significant personal debt, all hidden from my family, who still saw me as the successful corporate daughter who had it all together. That birthday was particularly painful. No one remembered until Facebook reminded them. Daniel texted a belated "Happy B-Day, sis" 3 days later. My parents called a week after, not to apologize for forgetting, but to ask if I could come look at a problem with the payroll system. That night, alone in my apartment, I broke down completely. I sobbed until my throat hurt, until my eyes swelled, until there was nothing left inside me. When the tears finally stopped, I felt a strange calm. Something had shifted inside me, a recognition that this path was unsustainable, not just financially, but emotionally. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet, different from any I'd made before. Instead of tracking the store's finances, I tracked my own sacrifices. Money transferred, hours worked without compensation, opportunities missed, relationships neglected. The totals were staggering. The cost, incalculable. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine an alternative. What if I stopped? What if I prioritized my own financial health, my own well-being? What if I accepted that Wilson Fine Furniture might not survive, and that this wasn't my failure, but the natural conclusion to a business that refused to adapt? The thought felt like betrayal, but it also felt like freedom. I didn't make a dramatic announcement or ultimatum. I simply began setting boundaries. I stopped answering work calls after 7 p.m. I declined a family vacation I couldn't afford, the first time I'd ever said no to a Wilson gathering. I started seeing a therapist, using my employer's mental health benefit. "You're describing a classic family system," my therapist explained during our third session. "You've been assigned the role of rescuer, problem solver, emotional shock absorber. These roles get established early and can be incredibly difficult to change." "So, I'm stuck?" I asked. "No, but changing the dynamic requires changing your behavior first. The system will resist. Expect pushback, guilt trips, even anger. That's normal when someone stops playing their assigned role." She was right about the resistance. My new boundaries were treated as selfishness, my unavailability as betrayal. Mom's calls became increasingly frantic. Dad's disapproval more overt. Family dinners grew tense. "You've changed," Mom said during one particularly uncomfortable meal. "That job has made you cold." I wanted to scream that I hadn't changed. I had finally stopped denying my own needs. But I stayed calm, recognizing that they weren't ready to hear it. In therapy, I worked through years of suppressed anger, of silent resentment, of the peculiar grief that comes from mourning a support you never received. I began to understand how my own complicity had allowed the situation to continue for so long. I had wanted their approval so desperately that I'd accepted crumbs of appreciation, building them into a feast in my mind. Meanwhile, the store's situation grew dire. The landlord raised the rent. A pipe burst in the warehouse, damaging inventory. The ancient delivery truck needed major repairs. Each crisis required more financial resources the business simply didn't have, and which I could no longer provide. I suggested downsizing to a smaller location, liquidating slow-moving inventory, even bringing in a partner to inject fresh capital and ideas. Each suggestion was met with the same resistance. That's not how we do things. The final blow came in early spring. The bank called a meeting to discuss the store's future. My name was still on most of the financial documents, so I was included. The message was clear and unavoidable. Without significant changes and immediate capital infusion, the bank would not extend further credit. They gave us 30 days to present a viable plan. I spent 2 weeks creating that plan, a complete business overhaul including relocation, rebranding, and refocusing on sustainable, locally crafted pieces that could command premium prices. I arranged meetings with potential investors, researched small business grants, even found a more affordable location that would reduce overhead by 40%. My parents listened to my presentation in stony silence. When I finished, Dad shook his head. "This isn't Wilson Fine Furniture anymore. This is something else. Something with your stamp on it, not your grandfather's." Dad, Grandpa was a brilliant craftsman who adapted to his time. If he were here now, he'd be the first to embrace these changes. "You didn't know him like I did," Dad said dismissively. "We'll find another way." But there was no other way. The bank rejected their counter-proposal, essentially a request, for more time and more credit with vague promises of improved sales. They issued a foreclosure notice, effective in 30 days. I received the official documentation that morning before the family dinner, the manila envelope that would change everything. I hadn't planned to bring it up that night. I thought I'd have a private conversation with my parents the next day, offer emotional support, help them navigate the practical aspects of the closure. Then came my mother's comment about my lack of dedication, my father's criticism of my priorities, the nodding agreement from relatives who had no idea I'd been bankrolling their comfortable family narrative for years. Something broke inside. Me in that moment. Not my heart, but the chains I'd forged myself, link by link, year by year. I placed the envelope on the table and finally spoke my truth. The aftermath was both exactly what I expected and nothing like I imagined. The shock, the denial, the anger, those followed the script. What surprised me was my own reaction. Not guilt, not grief, but profound relief. As if I'd been holding my breath underwater for years and finally surfaced, gasping in sweet air. Walking away from that dinner table meant walking away from a lifetime of expectations, obligations, and familiar pain. It meant stepping into the unknown territory of self-determination. It meant learning who Rachel Wilson really was, beneath the roles she'd been assigned. The journey wasn't easy. There were days I doubted myself, nights I lay awake replaying their shocked expressions, moments I reached for my phone to call and apologize. But each time, I remembered the spreadsheet I'd created on my 34th birthday, the cold, hard numbers revealing how much I'd already given and how little had changed as a result. My therapist helped me understand that true support means helping people grow, not enabling them to stay stuck. By continuing to silently prop up a failing business model, I wasn't helping my family. I was preventing them from facing reality and finding new paths forward. "Your parents are resourceful adults," she reminded me. "They survived before you became their safety net. They'll find ways to survive now." She was right. Within weeks, my father had secured a job at a hardware store, a significant step down in status, but a steady paycheck. My mother, unexpectedly, discovered a talent for creating handcrafted home decor items, which she began selling at local markets. They moved in with my aunt and uncle temporarily, swallowing their pride out of necessity. Daniel and Vanessa faced their own reckoning. Without the family store as a backdrop for their Cleveland life, they had to confront the precarious nature of their financial situation. Daniel's design studio pivoted to focus on commercial clients rather than high-end residential work. Vanessa took on freelance projects in addition to her agency job. They scaled back the house renovations, finished what was essential, and adopted a more modest lifestyle. As for me, I began the slow process of financial recovery. I consolidated my debt, created a strict budget, and focused on rebuilding my savings. It was humbling to realize that at 34, I was essentially starting over. But there was a strange freedom in hitting reset, in making financial decisions based solely on my own needs and goals. More importantly, I began exploring who I was beyond the family rescuer. I joined a book club, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. I volunteered teaching financial literacy at a women's shelter. I dusted off my old camera, a college graduation gift I'd barely used, and started capturing images of Cleveland's revitalizing neighborhoods. Photography became my unexpected salvation. Behind the lens, I found a perspective I'd never had before. The ability to frame my world, to choose what to focus on, to find beauty in unexpected places. The first time one of my photos was selected for a local exhibition, I didn't tell my family. This was something just for me, untethered from their expectations or judgments. The most surprising change came at work. Freed from the constant drain of family emergencies, I found new energy for my career. I took on challenging projects, volunteered for leadership opportunities, made my ambitions known to management. When the Chicago position opened up, heading a new initiative focused on financial empowerment for underserved communities, I applied without hesitation. The old Rachel would have dismissed the opportunity immediately. Chicago was too far. The family needed me nearby. Who would handle the store's taxes, manage holiday gatherings, be available for last-minute emergencies? The new Rachel recognized this as exactly the fresh start she needed. The job offer came with a substantial salary increase, relocation assistance, and the chance to build something meaningful from the ground up. When I called my boss Victor to accept, his response surprised me. About damn time, Wilson. I've been waiting years for you to prioritize your career over that family business. You've got too much talent to keep playing small. Had it been that obvious to everyone but me? Had I been transparently sacrificing my potential all this time, thinking no one noticed? The weeks before my move were a strange limbo, clearing out my apartment, training my replacement at work, saying goodbye to the few close friends I'd managed to maintain. I debated whether to tell my family about the move in person or simply email them once I was settled in Chicago. In the end, I chose a middle path, the dinner at my apartment. Not a reconciliation, but a step toward a different kind of relationship. One with clearer boundaries and more honest communication. Watching my father hold his granddaughter, seeing my mother genuinely engage with my photography, observing Daniel's new humility, these were moments I couldn't have imagined 6 months earlier. We were all changing, adapting to a new reality. None of us had chosen, but which perhaps we all needed. As they were leaving, my father paused at the door. The hardware store manager asked if I'd be interested in developing a training program for new hires, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Apparently, I have a knack for teaching people about tools and materials. Who knew? There was a vulnerability in his voice I'd never heard before, a tentative pride in this small achievement, so different from the furniture store legacy he'd clung to for decades. "You've always been a good teacher, Dad," I said. "I learned a lot from you at the store." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Not enough, apparently. I should have listened to you about the online sales, the changing market. You were right." "It doesn't matter now," I said gently. "What matters is what we all do next." He hugged me awkwardly before leaving, our first real embrace in years. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't erasing the past, but it was acknowledgement, and for now, that was enough. The day before my drive to Chicago, I visited the site of the former Wilson Fine Furniture store. The building stood empty, windows papered over, the faded sign still visible above the entrance. I expected to feel sad, guilty, perhaps even nostalgic. Instead, I felt a quiet acceptance. The store had run its course, as businesses sometimes do. Its ending wasn't a failure, mine or anyone else's. It was simply the conclusion of one chapter and the beginning of another. I took out my camera and photographed the building from different angles, not as a memorial, but as documentation of transition. Change, even painful change, created opportunities for growth. The empty storefront wouldn't stay empty forever. Something new would take its place, just as something new was taking the place of old patterns in our family. That night, I packed the last box in my apartment and labeled it Chicago. Inside were the essentials for my new beginning: my camera, equipment, the financial literacy curriculum I'd been developing, and a small wooden chair ornament, Grandpa Wilson's handiwork, a piece of family history I was choosing to carry forward. The foreclosure papers that had once felt so heavy were long gone, shredded and discarded. I didn't need physical reminders of that turning point. Its impact was woven into who I was becoming. Someone who could hold the truth of her worth without requiring others to validate it. Someone who could love her family without sacrificing herself on the altar of their expectations. As I closed the box, my phone chimed with a text from my mother. "Proud of you, Rachel. Call when you get to Chicago safely." Simple words that once would have seemed impossible. Evidence that even the deepest patterns can shift, given time. And courage and the willingness to change. Tomorrow I would drive toward a new horizon, a new job, a new chapter. Tonight, I allowed myself to acknowledge how far I'd already come. Not just from that family dinner months ago, but from the little girl who learned too early to put others' needs ahead of her own. That girl was still part of me, but she no longer defined me. I was Rachel Wilson, financial consultant, amateur photographer, work in progress. I was no longer the family savior, the invisible backbone, the reliable safety net. I was simply myself, flawed, healing, growing, and finally, irrevocably free. The manila envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days after the dinner. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, this tangible evidence of both failure and liberation. Each time I walked past, I ran my fingers over its smooth surface, remembering the weight of it in my hands, the sound it made hitting the cherry wood table, the silence that followed. On the 4th day, I made a decision. Not an emotional one, but methodical and deliberate, like balancing a ledger. I would disconnect systematically from the infrastructure of obligation I had built around myself. One by one, I would dismantle the systems that kept me tethered to expectations I never agreed to fulfill. I started with the practical, financial entanglements. The store's closure would trigger a cascade of paperwork, tax forms, creditor notifications, final payroll processing, tasks that would naturally fall to me as the family number cruncher. I contacted a small business liquidation specialist and paid their retainer from my own funds, my final contribution to Wilson Fine Furniture. I forwarded their information to my parents with a simple message. They'll handle everything, all. Questions should go to them. Next came the shared accounts. I had created a family PayPal years ago to streamline holiday gift exchanges, group vacation bookings, and shared expenses. The balance, money contributed by various relatives for the summer rental I'd already booked, sat untouched. I returned, each person's contribution with the same brief note. Plans have changed. Your deposit is refunded. The family Google Drive was more complex. It contained years of accumulated documents, Christmas gift spreadsheets noting preferences and sizes, medical information for elderly relatives, scanned copies of birth certificates and social security cards I'd collected for an insurance policy, upgrade, recipe collections, photo albums, vacation itineraries. Some dated back to my college days, when I first appointed myself the family's digital archivist. I couldn't simply delete it all. That would be punitive. And this wasn't about punishment. Instead, I created individual folders for each family member, moved their personal documents into the appropriate location, and shared access directly with them. Then I removed myself as administrator. They could continue using the information. They just couldn't continue expecting me to manage it. My mother called within hours of receiving her folder notification. "Rachel, what's happening with the Google Drive? Everything's reorganized." "I've shared each person's documents directly with them," I explained, keeping my voice neutral. It seemed more efficient. "But who's going to update the holiday gift list? Or the birthday calendar?" "Whoever wants to," I said. "I won't be managing those anymore." A long pause. "Is this because of the dinner? Because your father didn't mean..." "This isn't about one dinner, Mom. It's about establishing healthier boundaries." "Boundaries," she repeated, as if tasting a foreign food she wasn't sure she liked. "That sounds like something from a self-help book." "It's something from my therapist, actually." Another pause, longer this time. "You're seeing a therapist? Since when?" 3 months now." "Why didn't you tell us? Are you depressed? Is it work stress?" I almost laughed at her inability to connect my mental health needs with family dynamics. "I'm working through some personal things, that's all." "You need to know." "Well, if you needed someone to talk to, you could have come to me. That's what mothers are for." The irony was so thick I could almost touch it. "I need to go, Mom. I have plans tonight." After I hung up, I checked another item off my list. The shared family phone plan I'd been administrating since college. I transferred ownership to my father, ensuring all billing information was updated to reflect his responsibility. One by one, I untangled the practical threads that bound me to their expectations. The digital pruning continued. I archived the group text threads I'd been managing, one for holiday planning, another for family news updates, a third specifically for coordinating care for aging relatives. I didn't announce my departure. I simply stopped responding. when a new thread started about Thanksgiving plans. I didn't reply to my cousin's, "Rachel, can you put together the usual spreadsheet?" The silence that followed felt strange at first, then increasingly comfortable. My phone buzzed less frequently. My evenings opened up. The constant low-grade anxiety of waiting for the next family emergency began to fade. 2 weeks after the dinner, Daniel showed up at my office during lunch. I spotted him in the reception area, looking out of place among the suited financial professionals with his designer jeans and artfully rumpled shirt. "Got time for coffee?" he asked with the charming smile that had been getting him out of trouble since childhood. I considered saying no, then relented. 20 minutes. That's all I have. At the cafe across the street, he stirred his latte nervously. "So things are pretty tense with Mom and Dad." "I imagine they are," I replied, not offering more. "They're freaking out about the store. Dad's talking about taking out a second mortgage on the house to try to keep it going a little longer." I felt a flicker of concern, quickly replaced by resolution. That would be financially irresponsible. "That's what I told them." Daniel looked relieved that I agreed. "But they're not thinking clearly. Dad keeps saying it's just a temporary setback, that sales will pick up by Christmas." I sipped my coffee, waiting. Daniel hadn't sought me out just to give me updates. "The thing is," he continued, "they asked if I'd be willing to invest some of my savings to help with immediate expenses. But Vanessa and I just closed on the house, and with the baby coming..." There it was. "So you suggested they ask me instead?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Not exactly. I just mentioned that you might know of some small business rescue fund or something." "The store doesn't need a rescue fund, Daniel. It needs to close. The business model is obsolete, the location is overpriced, and the market has changed. Dad's refusal to adapt has made it unsalvageable." My brother stared at me, clearly shocked by my bluntness. Wow, that's cold. "It's realistic. Something this family has been avoiding for years. But it's not just a business, Rachel. It's our heritage. It's Grandpa's legacy." Grandpa's legacy isn't a failing store. It's the values he taught us. Craftsmanship, attention to detail, integrity. Those don't disappear when a building changes hands. Daniel leaned forward, dropping his voice. "Look, I know you've been helping them financially. Mom let it slip the other day. Did she mention how much? Or for how long?" He shook his head. "Over $40,000, Daniel. For nearly 2 years. That's what it took to keep the doors open this long. And what did it accomplish? Nothing. Changed. Dad still refused to modernize. Mom still dismissed my suggestions. They just kept expecting the magical money infusions to continue indefinitely." Daniel's eyes widened. 40,000? Jesus, Rachel. From your personal savings? "Among other sources," I said, not elaborating on the loans, the refinanced car, the depleted retirement account. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "They always made it sound like you were just helping with the bookkeeping, maybe covering a bill here and there." "That wasn't your fault," I conceded. They didn't want anyone to know how bad things really were, including themselves. Still, I should have realized. I should have asked more questions. I checked my watch. "I need to get back to work. Was there anything else?" He hesitated. "They think you're doing this to punish them. For the comments at dinner, for not appreciating your help enough." I felt a flash of anger, quickly controlled. This isn't about punishment. It's about finally prioritizing my own well-being. Tell them I said that, if you want. As I stood to leave, Daniel caught my arm. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening. What they were putting on you. What I was putting on you too with all the house planning help and stuff." The apology was unexpected. For a moment, I glimpsed the little brother I'd protected and cared for, not the entitled adult he'd become. Thank you for saying that. Back at my office, I found myself distracted, replaying the conversation. Daniel's shock seemed genuine. Had he really been that oblivious to the family dynamics? Or had he simply benefited too much from my assigned role to question it? That evening, I returned to my list. The practical entanglements were mostly severed, but the emotional and psychological ones required more deliberate attention. I created a new document titled Personal Boundaries and began writing. I will not attend family gatherings that cause me stress or anxiety. I will not manage events, finances, or logistics for others without explicit agreement and appreciation. I will not tolerate criticism of my career, lifestyle, or choices. I will not explain or defend my boundaries to those who don't respect them. The list grew as I acknowledged patterns I'd never consciously recognized before. It felt both terrifying and exhilarating to see these boundaries articulated in black and white. I printed the document and placed it on my refrigerator, a daily reminder of my commitment to myself. The next test came quickly. My Aunt Helen called the following Sunday. "Rachel, dear, I'm putting together the Memorial Day picnic, and I wanted to check if you could handle the RSVPs and food assignments like you usually do." In the past, I would have automatically agreed, then spent hours creating sign-up sheets, sending reminders, and coordinating dishes to ensure balanced offerings. Now I took a breath before responding. "I won't be able to do that this year, Aunt Helen." "Oh, are you going out of town?" "No, I'm just not taking on planning responsibilities anymore." "I see." Her tone cooled noticeably. "Well, I suppose I'll figure something out. Will you at least be attending?" I considered the prospect of facing the entire extended family, their questions about the store, their unspoken judgments. "I'm not sure yet. I'll let you know closer to the date." After we hung up, I expected to feel guilty. Instead, I felt oddly peaceful. Another thread cut, another expectation managed. I didn't end up attending that picnic, or the 4th of July barbecue, or the Labor Day clam bake. Each invitation declined became easier than the last. Meanwhile, the store liquidation proceeded. I drove past occasionally, watching as "everything must go" signs appeared in the windows, then "final days," then finally "closed," taped across the door my grandfather had installed 60 years earlier. Each time, I waited for the pang of grief, the sense of family heritage lost. It never quite materialized. Instead, I found myself noticing new sensations. The lightness in my shoulders when I woke without dreading family phone calls. The ease with which I made personal plans without checking who might need me. The gradual replenishment of my savings account as my salary went toward my needs alone. I began exploring activities I'd always been too busy for. A weekend photography workshop at the lakefront, a financial literacy volunteer program at the women's shelter, even a few tentative coffee dates arranged through an app I'd downloaded, on a whim. Some of these experiments were more successful than others. Turns out I have little aptitude for the pottery class I tried. But each represented a reclamation of time and energy previously consumed by family obligations. The most unexpected change came at work. Freed from constant family-related interruptions and emergencies, I found myself fully engaged with my projects for the first time in years. I stayed late not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest. I contributed more in meetings, volunteered for challenging assignments, mentored junior team members. Victor, my boss, noticed the shift. "You're bringing a different energy lately, Wilson," he remarked, after I presented a particularly innovative proposal to a major client. "More focused, more present. Whatever changes you're making in your personal life, they're working professionally." The client later approved my proposal, leading to the largest account I'd ever managed. As I worked on implementation plans, I found myself thinking beyond the immediate project to broader applications. financial empowerment initiatives that could help people avoid the kind of silent financial bleeding I'd experienced supporting my family. I drafted a concept paper on my own time, outlining a comprehensive program targeting underserved communities, particularly women frequently bearing hidden financial burdens for their families. When I hesitantly shared it with Victor, his response was immediate and enthusiastic. This is exactly the kind of forward-thinking initiative corporate has been pushing for. Would you be interested in heading up a pilot program? The opportunity was exciting but local. As I developed the framework further, I began to see its potential for broader application. When the posting for the Chicago position appeared in the company newsletter, a new division focused on financial empowerment, programs in underserved communities, it felt like the universe was sending a sign. Still, I hesitated. Chicago meant leaving Cleveland entirely. No more drive-by check-ins on family members. No easy returns if my parents truly needed me. No quick escapes from uncomfortable work events to the solitude of my familiar apartment. I mentioned my confusion to my therapist during our weekly session. "What's really holding you back?" she asked. "Is it concern for your family or fear of fully claiming your independence?" I considered her question carefully. Maybe both. Part of me still feels responsible for them, even after everything, and part of me is terrified of starting over somewhere new, without even the family identity I've been fighting against to define. Me. "Those are valid concerns," she acknowledged, "but consider this. Geographical distance often helps solidify psychological boundaries. Being physically removed can accelerate the process of redefining your role in the family system." That perspective shifted something in my thinking. Perhaps Chicago wasn't just an exciting career opportunity, it was the next necessary step in my personal evolution. I submitted my application that evening, then immediately closed my laptop and went for a long walk, trying not to overthink the decision. The interview process moved quickly. 2 phone screenings, a video conference with the executive team, a full-day on-site visit to Chicago where I toured potential office locations and met with community partners. Throughout, I found myself speaking with a confidence and clarity that surprised me. This wasn't just a job I could do. It was work I was meant to do. The offer came on a Tuesday morning. Significant salary increase, relocation package, substantial budget for program development, and considerable autonomy. I asked for 24 hours to consider, more out of formality than genuine indecision. That evening, I walked through my apartment, mentally cataloging what I would take to Chicago and what I would leave behind. The furniture was mostly functional rather than cherished. I could sell it and start fresh. The books, photos, and personal items would come with me. The rest. My eyes fell on a small wooden box on my bookshelf, one I hadn't opened in years. I knew what it contained. Mementos from the store, my grandfather's business cards, the keys to the front door I'd carried for a decade, photos from the 50th anniversary celebration, pieces of a legacy I'd fought to preserve long after it was sustainable. I sat on my couch with the box in my lap but didn't open it. Instead, I thought about legacy differently. My grandfather hadn't set out to create a monument to himself when he opened that store. He'd wanted to support his family, create beautiful things, serve his community. The business was a vehicle for those values, not the values themselves. What vehicle was I creating for my own values? What legacy was I building that aligned with my authentic self, not roles assigned to me by others? The Chicago position suddenly felt like more than an escape from Cleveland. It was an opportunity to channel my hard-won insights into meaningful work that could help others break similar patterns of financial servitude. I could transform my painful experience into a force for positive change. I called my boss first thing the next morning. "Victor, I'm accepting the Chicago offer." His response was surprisingly emotional. "Damn proud of you, Wilson. You've been destined for bigger things than this office for a long time. Just sorry to lose you from my team. I wouldn't be ready for this without your mentorship, I told him, meaning it. You saw potential in me before I recognized it myself. Nah, the potential was always clear. You just needed to get out from under whatever was holding you down. Glad you finally did. Word spread quickly through the office. Colleagues stopped by to congratulate me, ask about Chicago, discuss who might take over my Cleveland accounts. It felt surreal. This celebration of my departure, this acknowledgement of my professional worth without any connection to family expectations or obligations. I waited 3 days before telling my family about the move. Not out of spite, but from a desire to fully own my decision before navigating their reactions. I chose email rather than calls or in-person conversations, crafting a simple announcement. I wanted to let you know that I've accepted a position heading a new division in our Chicago office. I'll be moving at the end of the month. This is an exciting professional opportunity that aligns perfectly with my long-term career goals. I'm looking forward to this new chapter. I didn't apologize. I didn't justify. I didn't invite discussion or ask for approval. I simply informed them of my decision, adult to adult. The responses varied as expected. My mother called immediately, alternating between congratulations and thinly veiled guilt trips. It's such a long drive from Chicago if there's an emergency. My father sent a terse, good luck, which from him constituted significant effort. Daniel texted his genuine excitement, followed by an invitation to a goodbye dinner with him and Vanessa. Most surprising was my Aunt Helen, the family's unofficial social director and frequent requester of my organizational skills. Her email was thoughtful and reflective. Dear Rachel, congratulations on your new position. While we'll miss having you nearby, I understand the importance of following career opportunities. Your news has made me reflect on how often we've relied on your skills without properly acknowledging or appreciating them. I hope Chicago brings you the recognition and satisfaction you deserve. With love, Aunt Helen. I read her message several times, touched by its sincerity and self-awareness. Perhaps my boundaries weren't just changing me. They were causing ripples throughout the family system, prompting others to reconsider established patterns. The logistics of relocating consumed the following weeks. Giving notice on my apartment, selling furniture, arranging movers, house hunting remotely in Chicago neighborhoods I researched extensively each evening. The practical tasks provided a buffer against the emotional complexities of leaving. I declined most goodbye gatherings, preferring individual connections over group events that might devolve into family drama, coffee with a few close colleagues, lunch with my favorite client, dinner with Daniel and Vanessa, where we talked more openly than we had in years about our childhood, our parents, our differing experiences of the same family events. I never realized how different things were for you, Daniel admitted as we shared dessert. From my perspective, you were always the capable one, the one who had everything together, while I felt like the screw-up constantly being measured against your success. That's ironic, I replied, because from my view, you were the golden child who got to pursue his passions while I handled all the practical burdens. We were both right, in a way, he said thoughtfully. They did compare me to you constantly, but they also gave me freedom they never gave you. Like they decided early on that you were the responsible one, and I was the creative one, and neither of us got to be both. Or anything else we might have wanted to be, I added. Vanessa, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. You know what I've realized, watching your family? Everyone was assigned a role before you were old enough to consent to it, and anyone who tried to step outside that role was pulled back into line. Her outsider's perspective was surprisingly insightful. I thought about how long I'd performed my assigned role without questioning it, how difficult it had been to finally step out of that narrow identity. I don't want that for our daughter, Daniel said, resting his hand on Vanessa's pregnant belly. I want her to figure out who she is without us deciding it for her. That starts with us figuring out who we are, Vanessa told him gently. Beyond the family scripts we inherited. I looked at my brother and his wife with new appreciation. Perhaps the store's closure, painful as it was, had created space for growth none of us could have anticipated. In my final week in Cleveland, I reluctantly agreed to one last family dinner. Not at my parents' house, which still carried too many complicated memories, but at a neutral restaurant downtown. I set clear boundaries in advance, 2 hours maximum, no discussions of financial assistance, no pressure about my move. The evening was awkward but not disastrous. My parents seemed diminished somehow, my father less authoritative, my mother less certain in her social orchestration. They asked polite questions about my new position, made stiff small talk about the Chicago neighborhoods I was considering. Near the end of the meal, my father cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have been seeing a counselor," he said, the admission clearly costing him considerable pride. "Just to help us adjust to everything." I nodded, unsure how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability. "The counselor suggested we might have been unfair in our expectations of you," my mother added, "that we became dependent on your support in ways that weren't appropriate." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more self-awareness than I'd ever heard from either of them. "I hope the counseling is helpful," I said sincerely. "Change is hard for everyone." "We're proud of you, Rachel," my mother said, reaching across the table to touch my hand briefly. "The Chicago position sounds important. Helping people with financial problems. That's meaningful work." In the past, I would have desperately seized this morsel of approval, treasured it, built it into something more significant than it was. Now I accepted it simply as a moment of connection, neither more nor less meaningful than that. "Thank you," I said. "I think it will be." We parted with awkward hugs and promises to stay in touch. I drove home feeling strangely peaceful, as if I'd completed an important ritual marking the transition from one life phase to another. The night before the movers arrived, I sat on my bare mattress surrounded by labeled boxes containing the distilled essence of my Cleveland existence. I opened the wooden memento box I'd contemplated weeks earlier, finally ready to sort through its contents. The store keys, photos of 3 generations of Wilsons standing proudly before the showroom, a newspaper clipping from the grand opening in 1960, my grandfather's handwritten inventory system preserved in a plastic sleeve. I didn't feel the expected surge of grief or nostalgia. Instead, I felt a gentle appreciation for what these objects represented, a family legacy that had served its purpose for a specific time and place. The store was gone, but its impact on our community, on our family narrative, on my own development, remained. I selected a few meaningful items to bring to Chicago. The original business card, a photo of my grandfather at his workbench, the brass nameplate that had adorned his office door. The rest I repacked carefully to give to my parents. Not as a rejection of my heritage, but as an acknowledgement that they were the appropriate custodians of those particular memories. In that moment of calm sorting, I realized I was no longer running away from my family or our complicated history. I was simply moving toward a future I was choosing deliberately, with full awareness of both what I was leaving behind and what I was carrying forward. The foreclosure papers that had catalyzed this transformation were long gone, shredded and discarded weeks ago. I didn't need that physical reminder anymore. The lessons were now integrated into who I was becoming, someone who understood the true cost of silent sacrifice, the importance of honest boundaries, and the liberation that comes from authoring your own story. As I sealed the last box, my phone lit up with a text from my new Chicago supervisor. "Team's excited to meet you on Monday. Your office has a view of the lake." I smiled, picturing that view, that fresh start, that new perspective, both literally and figuratively. Cleveland would always be part of my story, but it no longer defined the chapters yet to be written. Tomorrow, I would drive west toward a horizon of my own choosing. But tonight, in this in-between space of empty walls and packed boxes, I honored the journey that had brought me here. The painful awakening, the deliberate dismantling of old patterns, the methodical construction of a new foundation built on self-respect rather than self-sacrifice. The manila envelope that had once held foreclosure papers had actually contained something far more valuable: permission to finally foreclose on expectations that had kept me mortgaged to others' needs at the expense of my own dreams. Chicago greeted me with wind and rain. I drove through sheets of water that first day, navigating unfamiliar streets with my GPS continually rerouting as I missed turns in the downpour. By the time I reached my temporary corporate housing, a sleek high-rise downtown, I was exhausted, damp, and questioning every life choice that had led me to this moment. "Welcome to the Lakeside Towers, Ms. Wilson," the concierge said, handing me a packet of information and a key card. "Your unit is on the 23rd floor. The movers delivered your boxes yesterday as scheduled." The elevator rose smoothly, carrying me away from my old life with each passing floor. When I opened the door to Unit 2308, I was greeted by stacks of labeled boxes and a wall of windows, showcasing a spectacular view of Lake Michigan, currently obscured by storm clouds and pelting rain. I stood in the center of the empty living room, surrounded by the physical remnants of my Cleveland existence and an expansive blank canvas of possibility. The dichotomy was overwhelming. For a moment, I considered calling someone, my mother, Daniel, even Aunt Helen, just to hear a familiar voice. Instead, I unpacked a single box containing bedding, made up the provided bed, and fell into an exhausted sleep without bothering with dinner. Morning brought sunshine streaming through uncovered windows and a clearer perspective. The lake stretched before me, vast and blue, dotted with sailboats taking advantage of the perfect weather. I made coffee in the basic kitchen and sat on the floor by the windows, laptop open to my calendar. First day at the new office, 3 days away. Apartment hunting appointments, scheduled for the weekend. Furniture shopping, to be determined. Family obligations, none. The last item gave me pause. For the first time in my adult life, I had no family responsibilities looming over me. No one expected me to organize a gathering, manage a crisis, or solve a financial problem. The freedom was dizzying. I spent that day unpacking essentials and exploring my new neighborhood on foot. The Chicago streets hummed with an energy Cleveland had always lacked, a sense of constant motion and possibility. I mapped coffee shops, grocery stores, public transit stops, building a mental framework of my new geography. As evening approached, I found a small neighborhood restaurant with sidewalk tables and ordered dinner alone, something I'd rarely allowed myself back home, where every meal seemed to involve family coordination or work networking. The simple pleasure of eating at my own pace, observing passersby, and not managing anyone else's experience felt revolutionary. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Made it to Chicago? Mom's trying not to freak out that she hasn't heard from you." I considered ignoring it, then decided on a middle path. "Arrived safely. Getting settled. We'll call when I'm more organized." His response came quickly. "Cool. Take your time. I told her to give you space." This new, more respectful Daniel still surprised me. Perhaps my boundary setting had created room for him to evolve beyond his assigned family role as well. Monday morning arrived with perfect clarity. I dressed in my most confident outfit: charcoal suit, silk blouse, the pearl earrings that had been my graduation gift from my grandmother, professional armor for a day of first impressions. The Chicago office occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek downtown high-rise, all glass and steel and sweeping views. The reception desk featured the company logo in illuminated blue letters against a backdrop of brushed aluminum. "Rachel Wilson," I told the receptionist. "I'm starting today as Director of Community Financial Empowerment Initiatives." She smiled warmly. Welcome to Sanders, Chicago, Ms. Wilson. Mr. Mendoza is expecting you. Javier Mendoza, the regional VP who had recruited me, met me with an enthusiastic handshake and a genuine smile. The team's been buzzing about your arrival, he said, leading me through an open office landscape. Your reputation from Cleveland preceded you. My reputation? I echoed, surprised. Victor raves about you. Says you're the most innovative thinker on his team, and he's furious we poached you. Javier grinned, but he also said you were ready for bigger challenges. We stopped before a corner office with a nameplate already installed. Rachel Wilson, Director of Community Financial Empowerment. This is yours, Javier said, opening the door to reveal a spacious office with the promised lake view. We scheduled an all-hands department meeting at 11 to introduce you to everyone. Until then, take some time to settle in. Left alone, I placed the few personal items I'd brought, a small potted plant, a framed photograph of Lake Erie at sunset that I'd taken during my photography class, my grandfather's brass nameplate, on the pristine desk. The space felt temporary, not yet mine, but I could envision it becoming a true reflection of this new professional identity I was growing into. The department meeting was a blur of names and faces, team members who would be reporting to me, colleagues from adjacent departments, administrative staff. I shook hands, exchanged brief pleasantries, tried to connect names with distinctive features to help me remember them. We're excited about the Financial Literacy Initiative, said Maya Chen, a sharp-eyed program manager who would be on my direct team. Especially your emphasis on women in caretaking roles. That's a demographic that's often overlooked. It's personal for me, I admitted, then wondered if I'd shared too much too soon. Maya nodded, her expression suggesting she understood more than I'd explicitly stated. The best initiatives usually are. Makes them more effective. After the meeting, Javier walked me through immediate priorities, existing partnerships, budget, parameters. The scope of my new role began to solidify. More autonomy than I'd ever had, but also more responsibility. This wasn't just a job change. It was a fundamental shift in my professional identity. Any questions? Javier asked as our orientation wrapped up. Just one, I said. How do you handle work-life boundaries here? He looked surprised by the question. We expect results, not martyrdom. I leave by 6 most days to have dinner. With my family. I don't email my team on weekends unless it's genuinely urgent. Why do you ask? Just trying to understand the culture, I explained. Not ready to share how blurred those boundaries had been in my previous life, where work emergencies blended seamlessly with family crises until I was perpetually on call, for everyone's needs but my own. Boundaries matter, Javier said simply. Burned-out employees don't serve anyone well. That evening, I sat at my temporary kitchen counter with takeout and my laptop, drafting preliminary program outlines for the Financial Empowerment Initiative. Ideas flowed easily in this new space, uninterrupted by family calls or lingering household tasks. I worked until midnight, not from obligation but from genuine enthusiasm. The program taking shape on my screen represented everything I wished I'd had access to during my own financial entanglement with Wilson Fine Furniture. Practical tools for maintaining independence while supporting loved ones, strategies for setting financial boundaries, resources for women shouldering invisible economic burdens for their families. The rest of the week established a new rhythm, intellectually challenging work days followed by evenings exploring my surroundings. I discovered a small gallery showcasing local photographers, a lakefront path perfect for morning jogs, a farmer's market with vendors who already recognized me by my second visit. Each discovery felt like a stitch in a new fabric of belonging I was slowly weaving for myself. Weekend apartment hunting brought a surprise. I fell in love with a converted loft in a former printing factory, far from the sleek high-rises I'd initially targeted. The space featured exposed brick walls, industrial windows, wooden support beams with visible history. an authenticity that resonated with something emerging in me. It was slightly over my planned budget, but still comfortably affordable with my increased salary. "It's got character," the real estate agent said, watching me examine every corner. "Not everyone appreciates that. Most corporate relocations want something turnkey and modern." "I'm not most corporate relocations," I replied, already mentally arranging furniture, envisioning morning coffee by those magnificent windows. I signed the lease that afternoon. My first major Chicago decision, made without consulting anyone, without considering how it would impact family gatherings or what my parents would think of the neighborhood. Simply my choice, reflecting my preferences alone. The movers transferred my boxes from temporary housing to the loft the following weekend. I spent a delicious day arranging my limited possessions, making lists of furniture I wanted to purchase, planning the space room by room. When I realized I needed additional storage solutions, I simply ordered what I wanted from a nearby home store. No family committee discussions, no considerations of whether certain pieces would accommodate holiday gatherings or visiting relatives. On Sunday evening, as I sat on my one piece of real furniture, a comfortable reading chair I'd splurged on, my mother called. I hesitated before answering, then decided on engagement with clear boundaries. "Hi, Mom. How are you?" "We're managing," she said, her tone suggesting barely contained chaos. "Your father's hours at the hardware store got cut back. The landlord raised the rent on the apartment. Daniel's been helping when he can, but with the baby coming." I recognized the pattern immediately, the litany of hardships followed by the implicit request for rescue. In the past, I would have jumped in with solutions, offers of assistance, perhaps even an immediate transfer of funds. Now, I listened, without that automatic response. "That sounds challenging," I said when she paused expectantly. "Yes, well..." Another pause. "How's Chicago?" "It's wonderful," I said, genuine enthusiasm warming my voice. "The job is exactly what I'd hoped for. I found a great apartment in a converted industrial building. I'm making connections in the neighborhood." "An industrial building, is that safe?" "It's a luxury conversion, Mom. Completely secure. The neighborhood is vibrant and walkable." "I just worry about you there alone. Chicago has such crime." "Problems." "Cleveland has higher crime rates statistically," I noted mildly. "I'm being careful and smart, just like I always have been." She sighed. "I suppose. It's just hard having you so far away when things are difficult here." I recognized the guilt tactic, but chose not to engage with it directly. "How's your online craft business developing?" The deflection worked. She launched into details about her handcrafted items, recent sales, challenges with shipping costs. I listened attentively, offering genuine encouragement about her business acumen and creativity. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I never realized how much I enjoy making things until the store closed, and I had to figure out something else. Your father thinks it's just a hobby, but I made enough last month to cover the electric bill." "That's impressive," I said sincerely. "You've adapted remarkably well." "I had to," she replied, a new note of pride in her voice. "We both did. It hasn't been easy, but..." She paused. Maybe it was time for change anyway. The admission startled me. Was this the same woman who had berated me for suggesting minor adaptations to the store's business model? Who had clung desperately to the way we've always done things even as the business hemorrhaged money? "Change can be clarifying," I offered carefully. "Yes," she agreed, though I still miss the store sometimes. The certainty of it, I guess. Knowing exactly what each day would bring. I understood that sentiment more than she realized. For all its burdens, my former life had offered a kind of security in its familiarity. The roles were constraining, but clear. I was the fixer, the responsible one, the family linchpin. Redefining myself required continuous, conscious choice. Exhilarating, but also exhausting in its own way. "How are you really doing, Rachel?" my mother asked, her tone softening. "Not just the job and the apartment. You." The question caught me off guard. When had my mother last asked about my well-being in a way that wasn't connected to family obligations or her own needs? I couldn't remember. "I'm finding my footing," I said, deciding on honesty. "Some days are easier than others. It's strange building a life from scratch at 34. "I imagine it is," she said. "I never did anything that brave." We talked for another 20 minutes, the longest conversation we'd had in years that didn't involve family logistics, store problems, or veiled criticisms. When we hung up, I sat in my reading chair for a long time, watching darkness settle over the Chicago skyline and processing the subtle shift in our interaction. The following weeks established new patterns. Work consumed most of my energy as I built the financial empowerment program from concept to implementation, assembling partnerships with community organizations, developing curriculum, hiring staff. I thrived in this role that utilized my financial expertise while allowing me to address the very issues that had trapped me for so long. My loft gradually transformed from empty industrial space to a home reflecting my emerging identity. I discovered an unexpected pleasure in selecting furniture and decor that pleased only me. No compromise required, no consideration of others' preferences or needs. The reading nook became a favorite spot, particularly on rainy weekends when I could lose myself in books I'd always meant to read but never found time for. Photography evolved from casual interest to serious hobby. I invested in better equipment, took advanced classes at a local art center, joined weekend photo walks exploring different Chicago neighborhoods. My growing portfolio captured urban landscapes, architectural details, Lake Michigan in all its moods, images that reflected my developing eye for beauty in unexpected places. The first real test of my new boundaries came 2 months after my move, when my father called on a Tuesday evening. "Rachel? It's Dad." His voice was so unfamiliar on the phone that for a moment I thought it might be Daniel. My father rarely called me directly. Usually my mother handled family communications. "Hi, Dad. Is everything okay?" "Not exactly." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "The transmission went out on the car. The repair estimate is over $2,000, which we don't have right now. Your mother thought, well, we were wondering if you might be able to help." The old familiar tug of obligation rose immediately, along with the impulse to solve the problem without question. I took a deep breath, remembering my therapist's guidance about establishing new patterns of interaction. "That's a tough situation," I said, keeping my tone sympathetic but neutral. "What options have you considered?" "Options?" He sounded confused by my response. "We don't have options. We need the car for work, and we don't have the money for repairs. Have you talked to the credit union about a small personal loan, or looked into whether the warranty might still cover part of it?" "Rachel," he said, impatience creeping into his voice. "If we had other options, I wouldn't be calling you." "I understand this is stressful," I acknowledged, "but I'm not in a position to send money right now. I've just moved, furnished a new apartment, and I'm still stabilizing my own finances." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken accusations. I had broken the unwritten family contract. When there's a crisis, Rachel fixes it. When money is needed, Rachel provides it. "So that's it?" he finally said. "You're doing well in Chicago, but you can't help your family?" The guilt trip was so familiar it almost made me laugh. "Dad, I care about you and Mom, but sending money isn't the only way to help. I can talk through options with you, help you make a budget plan, even research repair alternatives in your area. But I can't be your financial safety net anymore." "This isn't about being a safety net," he protested. "This is one emergency. After everything your mother and I did for you, I need to go, Dad," I interrupted, feeling the conversation sliding into destructive old patterns. "I have an early meeting tomorrow. Let me know if you want to discuss financial planning options when you're ready." I ended the call before he could respond, then sat with the discomfort of the interaction. My hands trembled slightly. Standing firm against the familiar pressure felt both terrible and necessary, like resetting a broken bone. I texted my therapist, requesting an extra session that week, then drew a hot bath and tried to release the tension the conversation had created. The following day, I received a text from Daniel. "Heads up, Dad's pissed. Says you refused to help with car repairs. Just FYI." I responded simply, "Thanks for the warning." An hour later, he texted again. "For what it's worth, I think you're right to set boundaries. They need to figure this out themselves." This unexpected support from my brother, once the primary beneficiary of my people-pleasing tendencies, felt like validation from an unlikely source. Perhaps he too was growing beyond his assigned family role in my absence. 3 days later, my mother called with news. "We sold some of the antique furniture from the store's office, got enough for the car repair and a bit extra for savings." "That was resourceful," I said, genuinely impressed. "Good thinking. It was your father's idea, actually. He said we need to stop expecting you to solve our problems." She paused. "He's still upset, but I think he's starting to understand." This small breakthrough energized me. The boundary had held, and rather than collapsing into crisis, my parents had found their own solution. The pattern was shifting, one interaction at a time. As summer transitioned to fall, my Chicago life deepened. I established friendships with colleagues who knew nothing of my family history or former caretaking role. Maya from my team became a regular lunch companion, while James from the marketing department introduced me to Chicago's vibrant theater scene. These relationships felt refreshingly uncomplicated. No decades of baggage, no assigned roles, just authentic connections based on shared interests and mutual respect. I joined a women's photography club that met monthly for dawn shoots at different city locations. The first session felt awkward. Me and my entry-level equipment among serious hobbyists with professional gear. But Eleanor, a silver-haired retired architect in her 70s, took me under her wing. "Cameras don't make photographers," she told me, noticing my self-consciousness. "Eyes do, and you've got a good eye." Under her mentorship, my skills developed rapidly. When the group held a small exhibition at a community art space, 2 of my lakefront images were included, an achievement that filled me with disproportionate pride. I sent my parents and Daniel digital invitations to the online gallery showing, not expecting them to attend virtually, but wanting to share this new facet of my identity. To my surprise, all 3 logged in for the virtual exhibition. My mother even used the chat function to comment on my photographs. "These are beautiful, Rachel. I never knew you were interested in photography." That simple acknowledgement of an interest she'd never noticed, a talent she'd never encouraged, struck me deeply. She was seeing me, perhaps for the first time, as someone separate from her needs and expectations. The Financial Empowerment initiative launched officially in October, with our first workshop series targeting women in caretaking roles with financial responsibilities for extended family. As I welcomed the initial participants, 20 women ranging from young mothers to grandmothers supporting multiple generations, I recognized echoes of my own experience in their stories. "My son lost his job and moved back home with his kids," one woman shared during introductions. "I emptied my retirement account helping them, and now I'm scared about my own future." "My parents never managed money well," another said. "Now, they're elderly, and I'm juggling their bills along with my own. I feel like I can't say no, but I'm drowning." I facilitated the discussion with an authenticity I couldn't have accessed in my previous life, where I was still embedded in the very patterns these women were struggling to change. The curriculum I'd developed addressed practical financial strategies, but also the emotional and psychological aspects of financial caretaking, The guilt, the obligation, the difficulty of establishing boundaries with loved ones. Setting financial boundaries isn't selfish, I told the group. It's necessary for sustainability. Like they say on airplanes, secure your own oxygen mask before helping others. After the workshop, several participants lingered to thank me personally. A woman in her 40s, dressed in carefully maintained but outdated business casual attire, grasped my hand warmly. "This is the first time I've heard someone name exactly what I've been experiencing," she said, eyes bright with unshed tears. I didn't even have words for it before. Just felt like I was failing someone no matter what I did. "I understand completely," I told her, the simple truth of those words creating a connection between us. "You really do, don't you?" she said, studying my face. "That makes all the difference." Driving home that evening, I reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed my painful family experience into something useful for others. The foreclosure papers that had once symbolized failure and conflict had ultimately led to this moment, using my hard-won insights to help others navigate similar challenges. The program expanded rapidly, with waiting lists forming for each, workshop series and community organizations requesting custom presentations. Local media took notice, with the Chicago Tribune running a feature on innovative financial literacy initiatives that prominently mentioned our focus on invisible financial caretakers. When the article appeared, I received a text from Daniel, with a screenshot of the piece. "Saw this online. So proud of you, Rach." My mother emailed rather than called, her message thoughtful and surprisingly perceptive. "The article explained what you're doing in Chicago better than I understood. Before, using your own experience to help others make better choices, that's admirable. I think I finally see why this work matters so much to you." These small acknowledgments from my family, seeing me clearly in my new role, recognizing the value of my work without relating it to their needs, marked a subtle but significant shift in our dynamic. They were beginning to know me as I truly was, not merely as I functioned within the family system. As the holidays approached, the inevitable question arose: would I return to Cleveland for Thanksgiving? Christmas? The old Rachel would have automatically arranged her schedule around family gatherings, prioritizing others' expectations above her own preferences. The new Rachel had options, and the freedom to choose among them. I decided on a compromise for Thanksgiving. I would visit Cleveland for 2 days, staying in a hotel rather than with family, maintaining control over my schedule and environment. For Christmas, I would remain in Chicago, having already committed to volunteering at a community dinner for isolated seniors through a program connected to our financial workshops. I communicated these decisions matter-of-factly, without apology or excessive justification. My mother expressed disappointment about Christmas, but accepted the Thanksgiving plan without protest, another small indicator of evolving boundaries. The Cleveland visit proved less stressful than anticipated. Meeting on neutral ground, restaurants rather than family homes, shifted the power dynamics in subtle but important ways. I was clearly a visitor now, not the default organizer and problem solver. My parents seemed different too, slightly diminished in stature but more authentic somehow. My father spoke candidly about adjusting to his reduced circumstances, finding unexpected satisfaction in mentoring younger employees at the hardware store. My mother showed genuine animation when discussing her growing online craft business and her new friendship with a former store customer who had become her business advisor. "We're making do," she said over dessert on my last evening in town. "It's not what we planned, but we're adapting." The irony wasn't lost on me, how similar her words were to what I'd suggested years ago when advocating for changes to the store's business model. But I didn't point this out. Some realizations need to be reached independently to hold any value. Daniel and Vanessa invited me to see their home, the renovation now complete, the nursery prepared for their daughter's imminent arrival. The house was lovely but modestly finished, clearly scaled back from their original grand plans. We prioritized Completing the essential spaces first, Vanessa explained, one hand resting on her heavily pregnant belly. The rest can wait until we're more established financially. Smart approach, I said, noting how different this was from their previous all-or-nothing renovation plans that had strained their resources. As Daniel walked me out to my rental car, he lingered in the driveway. You know, watching what happened with the store, with Mom and Dad. It changed how I think about money, about security. How so? I asked. I always thought security came from having the family business as a backup. Like no matter what happened with my design work, there was always the store as a safety net. He shrugged. When that disappeared, it was terrifying at first, then kind of freeing. I had to succeed or fail on my own merits. That is freeing, I agreed. Scary, but clarifying. Yeah. He kicked at a pebble on the driveway. I get now why you needed to make the break you did. Not just from the store, but from the whole role you were stuck in. I didn't see it clearly before. His insight touched me deeply. Thanks for saying that, Daniel. It means a lot. Returning to Chicago after those 2 days in Cleveland felt like a homecoming. My loft welcoming me back with its open spaces and lake views. My chosen life resuming its comfortable rhythms. I'd navigated the family visit without abandoning my boundaries or reverting to old patterns. Another small victory in the ongoing process of redefinition. December brought Chicago's iconic holiday displays, a light snowfall that transformed the city into a winter wonderland, and a surprise professional development. Javier called me into his office to discuss expanding our financial empowerment initiative regionally. The program metrics are exceeding all projections, he explained, sliding a report across his desk. Participant retention is nearly perfect, and the feedback is extraordinary. Corporate wants to roll this out to other major cities next year. That's fantastic, I said, scanning the impressive statistics. They want you to head the expansion, he continued. It would mean overseeing program implementation in 5 additional cities, substantial budget increase, and a significant promotion. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. 6 months ago, I'd been desperately trying to save a failing furniture store against its owner's wishes while my own career stagnated. Now, I was being offered leadership of a regional initiative I'd created from scratch. I'd need to travel regularly to the other locations, I said, thinking aloud. Build local? Teams, train facilitators? Extensively, especially in the first year, Javier confirmed. Is that a problem? I thought about my carefully constructed Chicago life, my growing social connections, my comfortable loft. Then I thought about the women in our workshops, the transformations I'd witnessed as they gained financial confidence and established healthier boundaries. Not a problem, I said decisively. An opportunity. As I left his office with the proposal details to review, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. It's happening. Vanessa's in labor. We'll update when baby arrives. I smiled at the synchronicity, new beginnings everywhere. My niece entering the world as I contemplated this next professional evolution. Cycles ending, others beginning. Life continuing to unfold in unexpected directions. That evening, I stood at my loft windows watching snow drift past the industrial glass panes, Chicago's lights sparkling through the gentle flurries. 6 months had transformed everything. My location, my career, my relationships, most fundamentally my relationship with myself. The journey hadn't been linear or simple. There had been moments of doubt, of loneliness, of wondering whether I'd made the right choice by walking away from everything familiar. But standing in this space I'd created for myself, contemplating opportunities I'd earned through my own merit rather than family obligation, I felt a certainty that had nothing to do with external validation. The foreclosure papers that had catalyzed this transformation were long gone, but their impact remained, not as a painful ending, but as the beginning of something authentic and wholly mine. In the reflection of the window glass, I caught a glimpse of myself smiling, relaxed, eyes clear and forward-looking. Not the family fixer, not the responsible daughter, not the perpetual caretaker. Just Rachel. Finally, completely, unapologetically myself. My phone chimed with an incoming email from Eleanor, my photography mentor, sharing details about an upcoming exhibit opportunity. Life continuing to expand in directions I couldn't have imagined when I sat at that family dinner table months ago, a manila envelope of foreclosure papers in my trembling hands. I turned from the window to respond to Eleanor's message, then prepare for tomorrow's opportunities, grateful for the unexpected gift hidden within what had once seemed like failure, the chance to author my own story, on my own terms, one conscious choice at a time. 1 year after placing that manila envelope on the family dinner table, I found myself standing before an audience of 300 people at the National Conference on Financial Empowerment in Seattle. My keynote address, Breaking the Cycle, Financial Independence and Family Systems, drew directly from my personal journey while offering practical strategies for others caught in similar patterns. Financial entanglement often begins with love, I told the attentive crowd. We support family members because we care, because we want to help, because it seems like the right thing to do. The slide from healthy support into unsustainable sacrifice happens so gradually we rarely notice until we're drowning. As I spoke, I spotted Javier in the audience, nodding encouragement. He had flown in specifically to hear my presentation, a gesture of support that my former supervisors in Cleveland would never have considered. Behind him sat Eleanor, my photography mentor who had become a cherished friend, her silver hair unmistakable, even from the stage. The most difficult truth to accept, I continued, is that enabling financial dependence ultimately harms both parties. The provider suffers depletion and resentment. The recipient never develops resilience or self-sufficiency. True empowerment requires allowing people to face natural consequences, even when those consequences are painful. The words resonated differently now than they would have 18 months earlier. They came from lived experience, from the complex process of disentangling myself from decades of financial caregiving, from watching my parents struggle and ultimately adapt to their new circumstances. There was compassion in my perspective now, not just the sharp edge of newly established boundaries. After the presentation, a line formed of people wanting to share their stories or ask questions. A woman approximately my mother's age grasped my hand warmly. "My daughter sent me here," she confided. "She's been trying to establish financial boundaries with me for years, and I've resisted. I thought she was being selfish. Today, I finally understood what she's been trying to tell me." "It's never too late to change the pattern," I assured her. "That's what gives me hope," she replied. "Seeing what you've accomplished gives me hope. For us, too." Later that evening, over dinner with Javier and Eleanor at a restaurant overlooking Puget Sound, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The regional expansion of our financial empowerment program now encompassed 7 major cities. I had built teams, trained facilitators, and watched our curriculum transform lives across the country. "When you first pitched this initiative," Javier remarked, "I knew it would be successful. But I didn't anticipate how deeply it would resonate, or how quickly it would grow." "Neither did I admitted. "I just knew it was needed because I had lived it." "That's why it works," Eleanor said, her photographer's eye studying me carefully. "Authenticity resonates. You're not just teaching financial strategies, you're modeling transformation." "Speaking of transformation," Javier interjected, "there's something we need to discuss. Corporate is creating a new national position, VP of Community Impact Initiatives. They want you to consider it." I stared at him, processing the implications. "That would mean relocating to New York, overseeing all community programs nationwide, not just the Financial Empowerment Initiative. Substantially increased responsibilities and compensation." He smiled slightly. And a corner office with a view of Central Park. New York, I repeated, thinking of my carefully established Chicago life, my loft, my photography group, the routines and connections I'd built. Another major change, another leap into the unknown. You don't have to decide immediately, Javier assured me. Take some time to consider it. Back in my hotel room that night, I called my therapist, still seeing her virtually despite my move to Chicago. A promotion requiring another relocation, she summarized after I explained the opportunity. How does that feel to you? Exciting, terrifying, a bit overwhelming, I admitted. I've just gotten comfortable in Chicago. And you're concerned about starting over again? Partly that, I agreed, but also wondering if I'm running toward something or away from something. The last move was so clearly about breaking unhealthy patterns. This one feels different. It is different, she pointed out. You're not the same person who left Cleveland. You've established healthier patterns, stronger boundaries. This decision can be made from a place of strength and choice, not reaction. Later, unable to sleep, I stood at the hotel window watching Seattle's lights reflect on the water. I thought about how far I had come from that devastating family. Dinner, not just geographically but emotionally and psychologically. The foreclosure that had initially seemed like catastrophe had instead precipitated a necessary dismantling of destructive family dynamics. My phone buzzed with a late-night text from Daniel. Livy took her first steps today, sending video. The clip showed my niece, almost 1-year-old now, wobbling determinedly across their living room floor, her face a study in concentration and delight. Daniel's voice in the background offered encouragement. Vanessa's hands remained outstretched, just in case, but not interfering with the baby's independent effort. I watched it 3 times, smiling at this perfect metaphor. Learning to walk meant both moving forward and accepting the possibility of falling. It required support that enabled rather than prevented growth. I texted back, "She's amazing, those determined eyes. Definitely a Wilson trait." Daniel responded immediately. "Mom says she looks just like you did at that age. Stubborn and unstoppable." This casual mention of our mother comparing Livy to me rather than to herself or to Daniel struck me as significant. She was seeing patterns, connections, continuity, not just loss and disappointment. The next morning, before my flight back to Chicago, I called my parents. These calls had become a monthly ritual, brief but generally pleasant exchanges focused on current activities rather than past grievances. "We saw your conference listed in the business section," my father said after initial greetings. "National keynote speaker. Pretty impressive." "Thanks, Dad. It went well. Your mother's been telling her craft fair friends that her daughter is a financial expert helping women across the country." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. "They're quite impressed." My mother took the phone. "Rachel, I've been thinking. Some of the women in my crafting circle struggle with the same issues your program addresses. Would it be possible to get some of those materials you mentioned? The budgeting worksheets and such?" "Of course," I said, touched by her request. "I'll send you our resource packet. You could start a little financial support group if you wanted." "That's exactly what I was thinking." Her voice brightened. "Nothing formal, just women helping women figure things out. Many of them are in situations similar to what we went through." "That sounds wonderful, Mom." And it did. This evidence of her growth, her desire to transform her own difficult experience into something helpful for others. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet hotel room considering the symmetry. My mother finding purpose in sharing hard-won insights, just as I had. The painful collapse of Wilson Fine Furniture had ultimately liberated both of us from roles that no longer served us. The question of the New York position lingered as I returned to Chicago and resumed my regular routines. I discussed it with friends, weighed practical considerations, researched neighborhoods where I might live. But the final clarity came unexpectedly during a dawn photography session with Eleanor at Montrose Harbor. We had been shooting the sunrise over Lake Michigan, capturing the golden light as it transformed the Chicago skyline. In a moment of rest between shots, Eleanor asked about my potential move. "Are you leaning one way or the other about New York?" I adjusted my camera settings before answering. "I'm scared of making the wrong choice. What if I get there and it's not what I expected? What if I miss Chicago too much?" Eleanor chuckled softly. "You're asking the wrong questions." "What are the right questions?" "Whether you go or stay, who will you be? What will you create? How will you grow?" She gestured toward the camera in my hands. "When I taught you about composition, what was the first principle?" "Decide what story you're telling," I recited. "Then frame accordingly." "Exactly. The location is just the frame. You're the story." She adjusted her tripod slightly. "The real question isn't Chicago versus New York. It's what story you want to tell next, and which setting best serves that narrative." Her perspective shifted something fundamental in my thinking. I had been approaching the decision from a place of potential loss. What would I be giving up? Rather than from possibility. What new chapters might open in New York? What connections, opportunities, growth might await? 2 weeks later, I accepted the position. The conversations with my family were straightforward. No guilt, no manipulation. Just sharing significant news with people who held varying degrees of importance in my life. My mother expressed genuine excitement. My father asked practical questions about the relocation package. Daniel promised to visit with Vanessa and Livy. The process of leaving Chicago was bittersweet. I had grown attached to my industrial loft, to the photography group, to my favorite coffee shop where the baristas knew my order by heart. But there was also exhilaration in the prospect of new beginnings, new challenges, a broader canvas for my professional vision. On my last evening, Eleanor hosted a small gathering of friends from the photography club. She presented me with a framed print, one of my own images of Lake Michigan at dawn, mounted with professional precision. "To remind you where you found your eye," she said, "and that beauty exists wherever you choose to look for it." I hugged her tightly, grateful for this unexpected mentor who had helped me see myself and my world more clearly. "I'll find new perspectives in New York," I promised. "But I'll never forget what I learned here." "Good." She smiled. "That's how growth works. We carry forward what serves us and leave behind what doesn't." The wisdom of her words resonated deeply. Wasn't that exactly what I had done in leaving Cleveland? In establishing boundaries with my family? In reclaiming my identity separate from assigned roles? I had carried forward values worth preserving: responsibility, competence, empathy, while discarding patterns that diminished me. My final act before leaving my Chicago loft was hanging Eleanor's gift, my own photograph, professionally framed, on the wall by the door. The new tenants might remove it immediately, but it felt important to mark this space that had witnessed such profound personal evolution. A statement that Rachel Wilson had been here, had grown here, had become more fully herself here. The morning of my departure dawned clear and crisp, Lake Michigan gleaming sapphire in the distance as my car service navigated toward the airport. I felt a familiar flutter of anxiety at the impending change, but it was tempered now with confidence in my resilience, my capacity to create meaning and connection wherever I landed. At the airport gate, I checked my phone one last time before boarding. A new email had arrived from my mother. Subject line: "Proud of you." The body contained just a few lines. "Rachel, as you start this new chapter in New York, I wanted you to know that your father and I are truly proud of the woman you've become, not because of your success, though that's wonderful, but because of your courage in choosing your own path. You've taught us more than you know. Love Tritium." I read the message twice. recognizing the gift it represented. Acknowledgement without agenda, pride without possession, love without conditions. A year ago, such a message would have seemed impossible. Now it felt like the natural culmination of our parallel journeys toward authenticity. Boarding the flight to New York, I thought about that manila envelope of foreclosure papers I had placed on the dinner table so long ago. What had seemed like an ending, of the store, of family harmony, of established patterns, had actually been a beginning. The true foreclosure hadn't been on a building but on limitations, on expectations that confined rather than nurtured, on versions of ourselves too small for our spirits. As the plane lifted into clear blue skies, I imagined the trajectory of my life changing course. Not abruptly as it had that night at the dinner table, but intentionally, joyfully, with full awareness of all the possibility stretching before me. New York awaited with its energy and opportunities. My expanded program waited to touch more lives. A future unwritten but unquestionably mine to shape awaited. The papers that had once represented failure now symbolized the most important success of all. The courage to choose oneself, to rewrite inherited scripts, to trust that authenticity eventually creates more genuine connection than any amount of self-sacrifice or people-pleasing ever could. My story didn't end with walking away from that family dinner. It began there, as all true stories begin, with the decision to finally, irrevocably choose myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.